はじめまして、Alfonso です。どうぞよろしくお願いします。Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. It's a great honor to have the privilege to address the esteemed Code Blue audience. To start with, I would like to poll your opinion and your experience with the zero-day market. If you feel inclined, please raise your hand and recognize your view. How many of you ever stories of people or organizations who go burned in trading vulnerability information or zero-day exploits? Anyone? And how many of you ever stories of betrayal, defection, or extortion in this secretive market? And how many of you expect to face any of these obstacles in the future? I do. Well, this next talk deals with such situations. And for those of you who never heard such stories, and for everyone else too, I have one to share. Jonathan Stewart has a freelance job, a family, and lives in a Phoenix suburb featuring stucco houses and manicure lawns. Back in 2013, after spending one of his workdays in Redmond, Jonathan was poking around on his own when he stumbled into a vulnerability in iOS 7. Jonathan, whose security career is old enough to remember when his colleagues were paid zilch, nothing, or offer a tiny token for finding vulnerabilities and writing exploit for them, tells about his discovery to a few friends, because he knows he can make some extra cash from his work, and he already did so in the past. Meet Tai. Tai is a vulnerability broker who heard about the Jonathan discovery from another hacker named Geot, and who is in touch with some businessmen in China. The plan is to take the Jonathan discovery, let Geot write an exploit for it, and sell this as a package deal to the Chinese businessman. Meanwhile, another group of hackers, called the evaders, heard about the same vulnerability and cut $1 million deal with a different group of Chinese businessmen. A Jonathan friend got in touch with them in the hope they could all work together. And you know what? After turning down, the evaders got to the finish line first, figuring out how to exploit the vulnerability and winning the race. Jonathan never thought that one of his friends would turn on him to sell him out. When he found out, with no rules, no watchdogs, no court system to protect his discovery, Jonathan felt used. That is to say that trading vulnerability information or zero-day exploits is considered a risky ordeal. Players in the secretive zero-day market face some inherent obstacles related to the time-sensitiveness of trade commodities, trust, price fairness, and possibility of defection. Or to put it succinctly, this is an hairy business. To begin with, vulnerability information is a time-sensitive commodity.
バルナラビリティに関する情報というのは非常に鮮度が重要なものです。この0デーのエクスプロイトというのは価値があるのはまだ広く知られていない時だけしか存在しません。もうすぐにそれが開いてしまいますと
It is disclosed or a remediation is released. Therefore, transactions should close in a short time and with a required discretion, or every day can be the last day for a no-day sale. Yet, in this market, with no centralized way to locate its players, finding buyers and sellers can be time-consuming. It may require market participants to have deals with individuals they are not familiar with, and whose true intentions are hard to verify. Furthermore, even if buyers and sellers manage to find each other with ease, negotiating a fair price is often challenging due to a lack of transparency. Factors like the adoption levels of the vulnerable component, the presence within a given attack surface, the level of authentication required to exploit the vulnerability, the difficulty of independent rediscovery, the exploit reliability, and other factors all have an impact on the market price. But these factors are difficult to measure. The position of the security researcher is further impoverished by the tension that exists between the amount of information they are required to disclose and the possibility of losing the intellectual property. As it happens for other information goods, proving the validity of a vulnerability information without disclosing it is challenging. There are essentially two possible approaches: reveal or demonstrate, and they are both undesirable. If the seller reveals the information beforehand, the possibility exists for the buyer to exploit it without paying for it. And vice versa. The seller might run away with the money if the buyer pays it in advance. Demonstrating the validity of a vulnerability via an exploit is not any better. Whoever has full control over the computing environment has an edge over the other party. If the demonstration is to be carried out on the seller devices, it becomes possible for the seller to tamper with it, leaving the buyer in the position to be unable to verify its integrity. On the other hand, if the demonstration is to be carried out on the buyer equipment, the buyer may record the working of the exploit and to steal it. Even worse, any vulnerability claim can be insured. Upon learning about a vulnerability from the seller, the other party might claim the same vulnerability as his own and exploit it. As many of these deals are international and unregulated, it becomes hard to enforce the potential contracts. Finally, the seller might be interested to grant exclusive rights to the buyer in order to receive the largest payoff. But the seller may defect and sell the same intellectual property to other buyers. This time are the buyers to lack the means to protect themselves. Of course, contracts may include language that force the seller to return the fund, to return the money, if the same not honor the contractual obligation, but in the zero-day market. The difficulty to identify sellers, to attribute multiple transactions to the same supplier, and to enforce contracts helps the seller willing to betray. These are obstacles that traditional business do not have to face. In order to alleviate some of these hurdles, it was suggested to use punishment to discourage the buyer from defecting, where punishment can be understood as the public disclosure of vulnerabilities. Resort to the use of trusted third parties as crucial entities for enabling the cooperation market participants, an example which are escrow service, or build a reputation system, for instance, a reputation score, as an instrument to establish trust relationship between distrustful players. Today, I will tell you about the first results on an ongoing study about extortion and cooperation in the zero-day market through the lens of game theory. Now, theory is boring, you might say. And precisely because it's boring, I went through this so you don't have to. The questions motivating this research are, can the zero-day market achieve cooperation and efficiency even in absence of trusted third parties? Can punishment discourage the buyer from defecting? Under which conditions the player can extort the opponent? Can cooperation be sustained also in fully anonymous settings? And what about semi-anonymous economies? This talk will address these questions and others by providing trading strategies applicable to each scenario. Now, why I'm interested in all of this, and why you may be interested as well. I work at the intersection of software security and security software, exploring and try to contain the space of unanticipated state. The choice of my career was dictated by dream. I dreamed that software manufacturers have the incentive to build security into their products. I dreamed that users have the instruments to hedge against the information security risks they are exposed to. I dreamed that vulnerability researchers have efficient means to capitalize on effort in their security analysis. I essentially dreamed that information symmetry is finally established between buyers and sellers in the security market. But that's just me. I'm a dreamer. The reality is that current economic, regulatory, and legal incentives are misaligned, distort, or ineffectual. What we observe today is what economists call a market failure. And a market failure is about the inability to self-correct. Software manufacturers will not forgo market shares. Software users will not forgo features. They translate in greater complexity, in a greater attack surface. And attackers will not forgo attacking tens of millions of vulnerable systems. How to invert this market? How do we change? I'm on the record for founding BWise, the first information security prediction market. This was my contribution towards establishing the required incentives. While I didn't succeed so far, there is still hope in me that we can improve our global security posture. And in order to understand the market forces behind the zero-day market and the needs for our community, I turn my attention to the dynamics of this economy. Understanding the emergence, sustainability, and breakdown of cooperation in the zero-day market is increasingly important. As our society grows more interconnected, it becomes more interdependent within itself. And the more interdependence, the greater, the larger the dynamic range of possible failures. Hence, it comes as no surprise that vulnerability information is key to both offensive and defensive purposes. Zero-day exploits are gaining a prominent role in national security, modern-day intelligence, and law enforcement operations. So, nation-state actors are buying vulnerabilities. Security scholars propose the law enforcement and intelligence community to use zero-day hacking as an alternative means to address their need to access communications, only later to find out that those communities are already knowledgeable about this craft and don't need to be lectured about that, should they? And the underground community, as well as the information security, defense, and surveillance industries happily respond. That is to say that this work finds application in a number of markets for vulnerability information and zero-day exploits. They range from over-the-counter zero-day trading to boutique exploit providers offering zero-day exploits and vulnerabilities for a subscription fee, to service models for vulnerability research. Now, in order to understand extortion and cooperation in the zero-day market, we need to understand the story of the Bazaar, the Maharaja Ultimatum, and the shadow of the future. This is the story of the dilemma faced by zero-day market participants who are each given the incentives to exploit each other. Few preliminaries and definitions are due. The ultimatum game is a game in economic experiments. A first player, the proposer, receives a sum of money and proposes how to divide the sum between himself and another player. A second player, the responder, chooses to either accept or reject the proposal. If he accepts, the money is split according to the proposal. If he rejects, neither player receives any money. The prisoner dilemma is the canonical game study in game theory that shows how two purely rational individuals might not cooperate, even if it appears that's their best interest to do so. In the prisoner dilemma, two prisoners commit a crime. If they both do not confess, they get a low punishment. If they both confess, they get a more severe punishment. If one confesses and the other does not, then the one that confesses gets a very low punishment and the other gets a very severe punishment. The iterated prisoner dilemma is a repeat game, where the prisoner dilemma game is the stage game. Agents play the prisoner dilemma game an indefinite number of times. Now, in order to model zero-day trades, I'm using a new game I call the O-Day dilemma. And the O-Day dilemma works as follows. There is a zero-day seller and a buyer. If they both cooperate, respectively, in supplying the zero-day and paying for the same, they both receive a reward payoff, R. If they both defect, respectively, retaining the intellectual property and the budget, if both receive a punishment payoff, P. If the buyer pays for the zero-day and the seller doesn't supply or undersupply, then the buyer receives the sucker payoff S, and the seller the temptation payoff T. However, if the seller provides the 0 day, and the buyer doesn't pay for it, 3 options becomes available to the betrayed participant. The seller may either opt to accept the betrayal, this is a scenario I call submissive, or to pursue to path for immature retaliation. A first avenue of retaliation is to close alternative deals with other buyers for the same 0 day. Let's call this scenario adaptive. A second avenue of retaliation, resembling the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, is to publish the 0 day and negate its value to the exploiter, minimizing the window opportunity associated with exploitable vulnerability. I call this scenario MAD, or MAD. Both immatch retaliation approach work as long as the vulnerability is fresh. And the following relation holds between the payoff. The temptation payoff is strictly greater than the reward payoff. The reward payoff is strictly greater than the punishment payoff. The reward payoff is also strictly greater than refurbished payoff, residual payoff, and expired payoff. Finally, the punishment payoff is strictly greater than the sucker payoff. Few remarks. In the submissive scenario, traders are playing the standard prisoner dilemma. The relationship R greater than P implies that mutual cooperation is superior to mutual defection. But the relationship T greater than R and P greater than S imply that defection is the dominant strategy for both agents. Or defection is better than cooperation for one player, no matter what the other player may play. In the adaptive scenario too, neither player nor the seller have dominant strategy. If we assume the expired payoff to be greater than the sucker payoff and the refurbished payoff to be smaller than the reward payoff. If the betrayed seller has the ability to close alternative deals for the same exploit, selling one day fully undetectable or one day private exploit, for instance, then defection will not be a dominant strategy anymore. But the market nature plays a role in this capacity. Today, the zero-day market is not a monopsony and is weakly regulated. But starting from the implementation of the Bazaar arrangement, new laws and regulation may emerge in this space, and this will have an impact on market liquidity. The MAD scenario is a variant of the standard prisoner dilemma, where the seller has the ability to negate the buyer the temptation to defect. He does so by making sure the temptation payoff approach the punishment payoff. Hence, defection is not a dominant strategy for the buyer. Now, if factors such as the market liquidity, export trade regulations, mean time to close a deal, prevent the adaptive retaliation approach from being undertaken, then the seller should consider disclosing publicly the exploit or the vulnerability. By doing so, she will not make herself worse off. She was going to get the sucker payoff anyway. Pretty the other way around. She will reduce the buyer incentives to defect on the first place. But to this end, it's important for the zero-day seller to have an efficient mean for doing full disclosure. I say full disclosure not for the sake of bragging rights anymore, but for modern-day brinkmanship. In fact, as faster the disclosure of the vulnerability, as shorter the window opportunity to the exploiter and the smaller the residual payoff. Now, since July 2002, the full disclosure list experienced a fair share of legal troubles along the way. And in a market that will likely witness more laws or regulations, posting on a mailing list may translate in an OPSEC failure if the anonymity of the submitter is not protected. All of which is to say that I would not be surprised to learn about a no-day disclosure platform. Researchers could use it for doing full disclosure. Players in the zero-day market could use it to retaliate against a buyer who defects. Insiders would turn to it to expose the secretive trade in intrusion and surveillance technologies. Dub it Whistle Day or Zero Leaks, if you like. It's worth to note that as long as the seller doesn't play in the submissive scenario, the buyer is not better off defecting. Therefore, in the one-shot sequential zero-day game, cooperation is possible if the seller moves first and retains the ability to punish the buyer who defects. If this is not the case, then the rational outcome is the action profile of mutual defection. The dilemma then is that mutual cooperation yields a better outcome than mutual defection, but is not the rational outcome, because the choice to cooperate at the individual level is not rational from a self-interest point of view. Therefore, I want to ask you, if no form of punishment can be undertaken by the seller, can the cooperative outcome still be sustained as an equilibrium? The iterated O-Day dilemma is a repeat game, where the O-Day dilemma is the stage game. Agents play the O-Day dilemma game an indefinite number of times. Now, whenever the submissive scenario applies, the iterated O-Day dilemma reduced to the iterated prisoner dilemma. Therefore, it becomes possible to tap into the extensive theoretical and experimental literature devoted to the study of repeat games and to draw some predictions on the emergence, sustainability, and breakdown of cooperation in the zero-day market. I ask you to consider three major settings. The anonymous setting, where traders know the identity of the party they are dealing with. The anonymous setting, where trades takes place among strangers. And the semi-anonymous setting, where either the buyer or the seller is anonymous. Since the Robert Oman work, published in 1959, it has been well known that in the anonymous setting, two rational individuals facing each other an indefinite number of times can sustain the cooperative outcome. More recently, William Press and Freeman Dyson changed the viewpoint in this game, illustrating the power granted to a sentient player, or a player with a theory of mind. A theory of mind is a poetic way to say that the player realized that her behavior can have an influence on the opponent's strategies. Press and Dyson introduced a new class of strategies called zero-determinant strategies, able to enforce a linear relationship between the two players' scores. Zero-determinant strategies have far-reaching consequences on zero-day traders. If one trader is aware of zero-determinant strategies, but the opponent is an evolutionary player, then the former can choose to extort the latter. A player is said to be evolutionary if she possesses no theory of mind and simply seeks to adjust her strategy to maximize her own score in response to whatever the adversary is doing. Extortion strategies grant a disproportionate number of high payoff to the extortionist to the expense of the victim. But it's the victim's best interest to cooperate with the extortionist because she's able to increase her score by doing so. But in so doing, she will end up increasing the extortionist score even more than her own. Now, the victim will never catch up to the extortionist, and she will accede to her because it pays her to do so. Here, we have an example for an extortionist strategy, granting to the player X 3 times the share of payoff above punishment than those rewarded to the opponent Y. But how does it work in practice? In practice, if we assume the reward, temptation, punishment, and sucker payoff to be respectively equal to 3, 5, 1, and 0, now, and if we assume I was an extortionist player, and you were an evolutionary one, I could have played this game with you. If we both cooperate last time, then I cooperate with probability 11 over 13. If I cheated on you last time, I cooperate with probability 7 over 26. If you cheated on me last time, I cooperate again with probability 1/2. And if we both defect, I will defect. In this way, on average, on the long run, my score -1 will be twice your score -1. I refer you to their paper for the details. Press and Dyson also show that if both players are sentient and only one is knowledgeable about zero-determinant strategies, then the iterated prisoner dilemma reduced to the ultimatum game. Let's suppose both players are sentient, but only the buyer is knowledgeable about zero-determinant strategies. Therefore, the buyer may decide to extort the seller. But the seller will eventually notice that something is amiss, because whenever she tries to improve her score, she ends up improving the buyer's score even more than her own. Having a theory in mind, the seller may eventually decide to sabotage the score of both. If she does so, the iterated prisoner dilemma reduced to the ultimatum game, with the buyer proposing an unfair ultimatum and the seller responding by either accepting or rejecting the proposal. Finally, Press and Dyson show that if both players are sentient and knowledgeable about zero-determinant strategies, then they can agree on playing what they call a generous zero-determinant strategies. In fact, any tentative to extort the opponent will result in low payoff for both. Therefore, the rational thing to do is to agree on a fair cooperation strategy. And they can do so by unilaterally setting the opponent's strategies payoff on agreed upon value, possibly the maximum possible. Whenever they do so, neither player can improve their score by violating the strategy, and each is punished for any purely malicious violation. Similarly to what we saw for the extortionist strategy, here we have a generous strategy, granting to the player X 2 times the payoff above reward than those awarded to the opponent Y. In practice, if we assume the same payoff as we did before, 2 players knowledgeable about zero-determinant strategies could follow these rules. If they both cooperate last time, then they will keep cooperating. If the player X cheated on Y last time, then X cooperate with probability 8 over 10. If Y cheated on X last time, then X cooperates again with probability 3 over 10. And if they both defect, X will cooperate, but with probability 2 over 10. On average, on the long run, the score of X minus 3 will be twice the score of Y minus 3. But all the results cited so far applies only when the market participants have the ability to identify each other. Identification is required to ascribe past action to the same market participants and to choose strategies according to the outcome of past interactions. But nowadays, we know that there are a number of black markets where traders are anonymous. Therefore, it's natural to ask, is cooperation possible in anonymous zero-day markets? Do you believe it is? If yes, which institution for monitoring and enforcement promote cooperation in this setting? In an experimental study on anonymous economies, Gabriele Camerai and Marco Casari found out that cooperation is high and increased with experience, but also noticed a low degree of cooperation when subjects see aggregate outcome without observing identities, as might result from discussing trading experience on anonymous fora. More interestingly, they observed that a costly personal punishment significantly promotes cooperation. In experimental treatment, subjects were given the possibility to observe action and outcome in their game, and to inflict at a cost a loss in the earnings of the defecting opponent. Camera Casari did so by adding a second stage to the one-shot game. And this second stage is a retaliation stage, resembling in full the adaptive and the med scenarios in the O'Day dilemma. Therefore, their result applies in our setting, the zero-day market. In the same treatment, players who observed the opponent defect sometimes employed personal punishment, which is to say in match retaliation, when staying in cooperative mode in the following period. And they collected extensive evidence showing that players show preference for in-match retaliation over informal retaliation. And this form of punishment was found to be also efficient. In fact, defectors who had been punished by a cooperator were more likely to cooperate in the following periods. Therefore, personal punishment can be understood as a public good. On the one hand, it significantly increased cooperation. On the other, the subjects that benefit the most are cooperators who punish little or not at all. Now, for the sake of completeness, let's turn our attention to semi-anonymous zero-day markets. This is a trading scenario documented by last summer hacking team leaks. According to the leak documentation, to the leak correspondence, the chief technology officer and co-founder of the Milan-based company was approached back in 2014 by an anonymous zero-day seller, proposing a Windows local privilege escalation exploit and some research services. Called upon the chief technology officer for an opinion, the chief operation officer recommended against closing any deals with anonymous individuals, and reaffirmed that accreditation is of essence. Therefore, I want to ask you, was the chief operation officer intuition correct? Can hacking team trust anonymous O'Day sellers? If you were in the place, would you have trust an anonymous seller with supplying O'Day? My answer to these questions are a corollary to the analysis above. Essentially, if one party is anonymous, the anonymous counterpart has no ability to know if she already had any deals with the same participant. Therefore, the latter can benefit from being sentient and is forced to choose a strategist as an evolutionary player would do. This means that the anonymous party, if the anonymous party is knowledgeable about zero-determinant strategies, can choose to extort the opponent. And this is terribly interesting because it shows that while cooperation can emerge in fully anonymous economies, extortion can proliferate in semi-anonymous markets. All of which is to say that the intuition by the chief operation officer in Hacking Team was quite correct. Therefore, today I have some good news, a cautionary note, and some recommendation to all-day traders. These are the key takeaways I would like to leave you with today. So please, bear with me 1 minute longer. To sum up, the zero-day market can achieve cooperation even in absence of trusted third parties, even in absence of escrow service. Cooperation can be sustained even when traders are anonymous. That's remarkable. And punishment is an effective instrument to discourage traders from defecting. But be careful, because it's possible to get extort. If the adversary knows about zero-day strategies, and we simply seek to adjust our strategy to maximize our own profit. Therefore, my 6 recommendations to all-day traders are the following. First, do not deal with anonymous traders if you cannot ensure your own anonymity. Second, discourage defection by practicing brinkmanship or casting the shadow of the future in every decision of your counterpart. Third, consider punishing defection to promote cooperation. The seller can do so by closing alternative deals or publishing the zero-day. Fourth, let the seller supply the vulnerability first if interested in one-time deal. Fifth, learn about zero-determinant strategies if playing in an anonymous market, of course. And sixth, forever defect if you see defection while playing in an anonymous market and have no ability to punish the opponent. And that's pretty much it as far as theory goes. In order to put this recommendation on firmer scientific grounds, experimental verification need to be carried out. So if interested, please be in touch. Before wrapping up, I have one last remark to make. And I would like to close with Vincent van Gogh, who once said, "Though I am often in the depth of misery, there is still calmness, pure harmony, a music inside me." Now, if you, like me, believe that insecurity or the presence of unmitigatable surprises is the misery of our time, if you, like me, believe that insecurity is the misery of our time, and at the same time, you, like me, are also sanguine about our ability to attain better security trade-off and to give to our children the chance to reach confidence in the process to which they will entrust their business, then we can paraphrase Vincent van Gogh and say that though we are often in the depth of insecurity, there is still calmness, pure harmony, a music inside us. Thank you.
Hello. Have you ever bought an all-day before? Have you ever sold an all-day before? Or have you ever brokered an all-day deal before?
I facilitated some deal.
So you brokered before?
Yes.
So you're speaking with first-hand knowledge of how the all-day market is working?
I had some first-hand experience with this. That's quite correct. But my experience can be partial because, anyway, very limited. So I tried to draw some prediction using a a theoretical framework, and also to reconcile this prediction with some other experiences collected from the field.
So your company is involved in the all-day trading business somehow?
No, I work at engineering security into products.
Right. So the all-day deal that you brokered was on your own. It was an individual effort.
This was an orthogonal experience.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks for your question.
ゼロデイ情報を市場での売買というのは倫理的に問題があると思いませんか。もしくはそのような問いは無意味という考えでしょうか。
Thanks for your question. Definitely there is an ethical question, and it's far from being meaningless. However, I believe there are different different sensibilities towards ethical issues. I believe that while ethical issues need to be discussed more openly and widely, at the same time we need to address and align the security incentives into this market. Because as long as there will be some markets outbidding other vulnerability purchasing programs like bounty programs, there will be a sizable section, a sizable part of our community selling their vulnerability information, the zero-day exploits, for profit. So in order to let some dynamics, some phenomenon emerge, we need to make sure to not only to address ethical issues, and who am I to provide a satisfactory solution to this, but to line also the economics of the information security market. So right now I'm studying all of this in order to focus more specifically on the economics, leaving the ethical issues to other entities in our industry.
大変興味深いプレゼンテーションありがとうございました。今回ちょっと理論の話でしたけど、実際ブラックマーケットって存在するので、その理論とそのブラックマーケットがどれぐらい一致しているかっていうようなところの検証とかはされてるんでしょうか。
This is a very good question, a relevant question. I try to reconcile the theoretical prediction with some first-hand experience. Unfortunately, the data set of public experience is pretty narrow. So in my presentation, I name a few. The Charlie Miller experience documented in the workshop on the economics of information security in 2007, the Jonathan Stewart race to exploit iOS 7, and also the hacking team experience with the anonymous zero-day seller. And all these experiences are consistent with the theoretical predictions. And I also had some exposure in private to some further trades that reflects also this prediction. But I mean, the data set is anyway so small that I cannot tell, cannot say that everything fulfill my model. It's a model, so can be somewhat right, but can be can have also some pitfalls and some limitations. Sure enough.
I'm afraid I couldn't follow all the math and simulations, but it seems to me that one part is missing, which is dealing with different, say, value of the exploits. Like you can be selling cheap or easy exploits until you get, I mean, trust by somebody, and then you can defeat on a big exploit. So if you're thinking only about anonymous market, this kind of doesn't apply so much, but any of the other scenarios, this is actually a lot relevant.
Thanks for your question. That's true. Some nowadays, unfortunately, with the attack surface growing larger and larger, we have a plenty of vulnerabilities ready to be exploited. So there will be always an oversupply of bugs to be exploited for profit, and this means that some really skilled, talented researcher can trade low-hanging fruits and build a reputation in market that are not anonymous, only later to benefit from their reputation, burn it in order to sell something big. I never heard about any of those stories so far, but I would not be surprised about this because it's a matter of profit. And, if the incentives, the economic incentives align, and we are witnessing prices in the market that are increasing more and more, sooner or later this may eventually happen. So thanks for remarking this point.
Okay, thank you very much. We still have some time left. Are you okay? The middle block, the person in the first row. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for the interesting presentation. Zero-day vulnerability. So security vendor will publicize that free of charge. So I'll provide that to the developing company. Is it really a zero-yen player? The impact on the market is significant. What do you think? Well, my point is that in some of the players in the marketplace, there is some, if they identify the vulnerability and they give it for free of charge. So I'm sure information value decreases if they do that, if they provide that free of charge. So I'm sure there's some impact on this kind of zero-day market. How do you analyze that?
Thanks for your question. That's true. There are some markets, especially in some regions of the globe, where the payoff for the vulnerability researchers is not only financial, but comes from essentially recognition by the community. And in those cases, especially not really critical vulnerabilities can be disclosed for free in order to gain some exposure, become a pop star, maybe land a new job. This is absolutely true. At the same time, it's true also that whenever I speak with friends and colleagues in countries where the security market is pretty developed and mature, they are ready to consider this option in order to make career in the field. But when I speak with other friends from countries where the industry is not so well developed and where the opportunities to land new job is not so high, they go after the financial reward. They go after first after the financial payoff. So that's true, and what you say, and is also fortunate because whenever this applies, we can run other vulnerability markets, such as bug bounty programs, in order to invite security researchers to disclose vulnerabilities. But sometimes vulnerability purchasing programs, bug bounty programs, are outbid by the zero-day market, and there is a sizable part of our community trading with those entities, those actors. We should align incentives in order to make sure that more vulnerabilities get disclosed, reported, and fixed in a timely way.
ですね、市場が非常に大きくなった場合、例えば影響力の大きい会社、iPhone の発売日とかですね、マイクロソフトとかに影響するような大きなバグが、取引や情報が流れた場合に、株価の操作、要はインサイダーとかですね、風雪のルフといった形で 他の株式取引市場に大きな影響を与えるということが出てくると、そうなると日本も含めて、ワールドワイドで証券取引市場において、非常に重い処罰が出るということが、将来的に考えられると思うのですけれども、今のところそういった事態はまだ起きていないと思うんですけれども、どれぐらいでそういったことは起きるのか、あるいは起きないのかといったところはどういうふうにお考えでしょうか。
This is very interesting. Intuitively, I always was inclined to believe that security incidents or different variety can have an impact, financial impact, on companies that are traded publicly. However, I was surprised and was forced to reconsider my position by the recent experience in the security market where some data breaches were reported according to some national laws, for instance, in the United States, where you need to report any breach to the authorities. And the market price of those companies, let's say Target, for instance, was local impact in the first day, but it's true also that at the same time recover quickly and regain its position right after. So nowadays, at the end of the day, I'm not really persuaded that security incidents are highly considered by investors, especially if they're not able to make a significant dent into the financials of the companies in the long run.